Blood is supposed to be thicker than water, but in my family, it was always thinner than a perfectly curated country club aesthetic. When my parents callously banned my 7-year-old daughter from my brother's wedding, they thought I'd just smile and comply. On Thanksgiving, they learned exactly how wrong they were. My name is Sarah. To understand the absolute magnitude of the betrayal that tore my family apart, you first need to understand the suffocating environment I was raised in. I grew up in an affluent, heavily gated suburb of Boston, raised by parents who valued outward appearances above oxygen, love, or basic human decency. My father, Richard, was a corporate attorney whose entire personality revolved around his golf handicap and his imported cars. My mother, Barbara, was a woman who treated motherhood like a competitive sport. To them, children weren't human beings to be nurtured. We were accessories to be styled, molded, and paraded around the country club to secure their social standing. I was the older sibling, but I was never the favorite. That title belonged exclusively to my younger brother, David. David was the golden boy, the handsome, charming, athletic son who never questioned our parents' shallow values. While I was in my room reading or pursuing a degree in landscape architecture, a career my mother openly sneered at as glorified gardening, David was networking with my father's partners, dating the right girls, and seamlessly sliding into the mold of a corporate junior executive. The divide between my parents and me only widened when I met my husband, Mark. Mark is a high school history teacher. He is kind, deeply empathetic, fiercely loyal, and absolutely unconcerned with the thread count of his suits or the brand of his watch. When I married him, my parents treated our modest garden wedding like a funeral for my social potential. They smiled for the cameras, but behind closed doors, my mother constantly reminded me that I was settling. But the real friction started when we had our daughter, Lily. Lily is the absolute light of my life. She is brilliant, funny, and possesses a profound kindness that astounds me every single day. She also has a sensory processing disorder and high-functioning autism. For Lily, the world is sometimes turned up to maximum volume. Bright lights, overlapping conversations, and chaotic environments can overwhelm her. To cope, she sometimes wears soft pink noise-canceling headphones, and she has a few self-soothing behaviors, like softly humming when she's concentrating. To Mark and me, she is perfect. To my parents, she was a defect in their flawless family portrait. My mother, Barbara, never missed an opportunity to express her thinly veiled disgust. She would constantly offer me articles about curing neurodivergence or suggest that I just wasn't disciplining Lily enough. When we visited their pristine, minimalist home, my mother would follow Lily around like a hawk, terrified she might smudge a glass table or make an inappropriate noise in front of the neighbors. Then came the year of the wedding. David had gotten engaged to Chloe. If my mother had a secret laboratory where she could genetically engineer the perfect daughter-in-law, she would have created Chloe. Chloe came from old Connecticut money, worked in high-end public relations, and had a meticulous, almost terrifying obsession with aesthetics. From the moment the engagement ring slipped onto her finger, the wedding became a monumental, $150,000 production, set for an exclusive coastal resort in Newport, Rhode Island. For months, the entire family was held hostage by Chloe's wedding demands. The color palette was a highly specific blend of champagne, muted sage, and oyster. The guest list was a who's who of regional elite. To my absolute shock, about 6 months before the wedding, Chloe and David invited us over for dinner and presented Lily with a beautiful, custom-made wooden box. Inside was a delicate floral wreath and a card that read, "Lily, will you be our flower girl?" I was hesitant. A massive, loud wedding wasn't exactly the ideal environment for Lily, but David looked at me with what I thought was genuine brotherly affection. "We want her there, Sarah. It wouldn't be the same without my only niece." Chloe smiled brightly, assuring me that Lily would only have to walk down the aisle, scatter some petals, and then she could sit right with Mark and me. She even promised to coordinate a special, sensory-friendly fabric for Lily's dress so she wouldn't be itchy or uncomfortable. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Lily was ecstatic, She spent weeks practicing her pedal, dropping in our hallway, carefully placing torn-up pieces of scrap paper on the carpet while humming the wedding march. We went to the boutique, paid $350 for the custom-tailored flower girl dress, and got Lily fitted. For a brief, fleeting moment, I actually believed that my family was making an effort to accept my daughter. I thought this wedding might be a turning point for us all. I was a fool. The illusion of family unity shattered exactly 21 days before the wedding. It started at a seemingly innocuous pre-wedding family brunch hosted by Chloe's parents at their sprawling estate. It was meant to be a final meet and greet for the immediate families and the bridal party. The house was packed, the champagne was flowing, and the acoustics in the grand dining room were terrible. The overlapping chatter, the clinking of heavy silverware on china, and the sheer volume of people quickly became too much for Lily. She didn't throw a tantrum. She didn't scream. She simply did exactly what her occupational therapist had taught her to do. She politely excused herself from the table, went to a quiet corner in the adjacent sunroom, put on her soft pink noise-canceling headphones, and started coloring in her sketchbook. Mark and I took turns checking on her, and she was perfectly content and regulated. However, from the dining room, I caught the looks. Chloe's mother leaned over and whispered something to my mother. My mother, Barbara, went rigid. Her face flushed, and she shot a glare in my direction that could have stripped paint off the walls. Later, as we were leaving, my father pulled me aside. "Sarah," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you really need to get a handle on the girls' behavior. Wearing construction earmuffs at a formal luncheon? It's embarrassing." "They are sensory headphones, Dad," I replied, my blood boiling, and she handled herself beautifully by stepping away when she was overwhelmed. "I'm proud of her," he scoffed, shaking his head. "Just make sure she's normal for the wedding. Chloe is under a lot of stress." I thought that was the end of it, just another standard dose of my parents' toxicity that I could brush off. But 2 days later, my phone rang. It was my mother. She didn't bother with small talk. "Sarah," Barbara began, her tone possessing that chilling, corporate detachment she used when she was delivering an ultimatum. "I'm calling about the wedding. David, Chloe, and your father and I had a long talk last night. We've decided to go in a different direction with the bridal party." The phrase hung in the air. Go in a different direction. She was speaking about my 7-year-old daughter like she was a vendor who had failed to deliver the right shade of napkins. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "We are removing Lily as the flower girl," she said smoothly, completely devoid of empathy. "It's just not going to work out. Chloe is incredibly stressed about the aesthetic of the ceremony, and after seeing Lily's episode at the brunch, we just can't risk it." "Episode?" I barked. She colored quietly in a sunroom. "She was wearing giant pink headphones, Sarah," my mother snapped, her veneer of calm cracking. "It looked ridiculous. What if she decides the church is too loud? What if she insists on wearing those hideous things while walking down the aisle? The videographer is costing us $15,000. We cannot have a child having a meltdown or wearing headphones in the professional photos. It will completely ruin the aesthetic." I was hyperventilating. The sheer cruelty of it knocked the wind out of me. "She's your granddaughter. She's David's niece. You asked her to do this." "And we made a mistake," Barbara countered coldly. "We were trying to be inclusive, but we have to be realistic. Chloe's sister, Jessica, has agreed to let her daughter, Madison, step in. Madison is practically Lily's age, and she's had pageantry experience. It's just a better fit for the optics." "Optics?" I whispered, tears of absolute rage stinging my eyes. "You are breaking a little girl's heart for optics?" "Oh, stop being so dramatic," she sighed dismissively. "Lily barely understands what's going on anyway. You and Mark can still come as guests, of course. But we've arranged for a sitter at the hotel for the children under 10 who aren't in the wedding party. Lily can stay there during the ceremony and reception." Not only was my daughter fired from the wedding, but she was now effectively banned from attending it altogether. I hung up the phone without another word. I walked into the living room where Lily was sitting on the floor with Mark, showing him a drawing she had made of herself in her beautiful flower girl dress, tossing petals. The sight of it broke me. I collapsed onto the couch and started sobbing uncontrollably. When I finally managed to tell Mark what had happened, I watched my gentle, patient husband turn a shade of red I had never seen before. "I'm calling David," he growled, reaching for his phone. "No, I will," I said, wiping my eyes. I dialed my brother's number. He answered on the second ring, sounding defensive before I even spoke. "Look, Sarah, Mom already told me she talked to you." "David, please tell me this is a sick joke," I pleaded. "Tell me you aren't doing this to Lily." "It's Chloe's day, Sarah," David deflected, retreating behind his fiancée's skirt like a coward. "She has a very specific vision. You know how she is. We just want everything to be perfect, and you have to admit, Lily is unpredictable." "She is a child, David. A child who loves you and has been practicing for weeks." "Well, maybe you shouldn't have hyped her up so much," he shot back viciously. "Look, we're not bad people. We're just being practical. Madison knows how to hit her marks for the photographer. Just bring Lily to the hotel, leave her with the nanny, and come enjoy the open bar. Why do you have to make everything about you?" "Make everything about me." That was the moment the last remaining thread binding me to my family snapped. There was no screaming match. There was no further bargaining. A cold, absolute clarity washed over me. "We aren't coming, David," I said, my voice dead flat. "What? Sarah, don't do this. Don't be petty. Mom will be furious if you boycott the wedding." "I don't give a damn about Mom, and I don't give a damn about your aesthetic," I replied. "If my daughter is too defective for your photos, then my husband and I are too defective for your guest list. Have a beautiful wedding, David." I hung up and blocked his number. Over the next 48 hours, the backlash was explosive. My parents bombarded me with voicemails, alternating between furious threats of disownment and guilt trips about how I was ruining the family image by creating an empty seat at the head tables. My mother even sent a courier to my house, demanding I hand over the $350 flower girl dress so Madison could wear it, since I wasn't using it anyway. I took immense pleasure in taking a pair of fabric scissors to the dress and mailing the shredded remains back to her in a garbage bag. The hardest part, however, was telling Lily. Mark and I sat her down and gently explained that Uncle David's wedding had changed and that we weren't going to be able to go. We told her it had absolutely nothing to do with her and everything to do with adults being silly. She cried. She didn't understand why she couldn't wear her beautiful dress or drop the petals she had practiced so hard with. Holding my weeping daughter, knowing that her own grandparents and uncle had caused this pain purely out of vanity, ignited a fire of vengeance inside me that would not be extinguished. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully pruned the undesirable branch from their perfect family tree without consequence. They had no idea that I held the keys to their entire financial facade, and the perfect opportunity to destroy them was already scheduled on the calendar. Thanksgiving. The weekend of the Newport wedding came and went. I spent it entirely offline, taking Mark and Lily to a quiet, secluded cabin in the White Mountains. We hiked, we toasted marshmallows, and we let Lily wear her pink headphones whenever the wind howling through the pines felt too loud. It was peaceful. But when we returned home, the digital onslaught was waiting. My social media feeds were choked with professional, magazine-quality photos of David and Chloe's $150,000 extravaganza. There was Madison, Chloe's niece, wearing the exact same style of custom dress Lily was supposed to wear, tossing pristine white rose petals down an aisle flanked by towering floral arches. The captions from my mother were nauseating. "A flawless day for our perfect family," and two beautiful families uniting without a single hitch. I didn't comment. I didn't cry. The tears had completely dried up, replaced by a cold, calculated focus. What my parents and my golden boy brother had conveniently forgotten in their quest for aesthetic perfection was a rather massive financial skeleton hiding in their impeccably designed closet. My father, Richard, projected the image of an elite, untouchable corporate attorney. The reality was that 10 years ago, he was quietly implicated in a massive malpractice suit involving a mishandled corporate merger. To avoid total financial ruin and protect his most prized asset from a potential judgment, his sprawling, six-bedroom colonial estate in the ultra-exclusive neighborhood of Oak Cliff, he executed a desperate legal maneuver. He transferred the deed of the property into an irrevocable trust. And because David was still a financially reckless teenager at the time, and my parents needed an adult with a spotless credit history and no legal liabilities to act as the legal shield, they named me as the sole trustee and legal owner of the property. At 22, I hadn't fully understood what I was signing. My father had framed it as routine estate planning and tax efficiency. For a decade, I had simply ignored the paperwork sitting in my safe deposit box, allowing them to live in the house rent-free while they paid the property taxes and maintenance, living their country club lie. But after the wedding incident, I went to the bank. I pulled out the original documents from the Pendleton Oakcliff Trust. I then hired a brilliant, utterly ruthless real estate attorney named Harrison Cole. I paid his retainer and asked him to do a deep dive into the trust and my parents' current financial standing. What Harrison uncovered a week later was staggering. My parents were completely broke. The Newport wedding had been the final nail in their financial coffin. To pay for their share of David's extravagant rehearsal dinner, the open bar, and their own designer wardrobes, they had taken out massive, high-interest personal loans. Worse, Harrison discovered that they hadn't paid the property taxes on the Oak Cliff estate in over 14 months. Because my name was on the trust, the county was preparing to send the delinquency notices to my address. They had essentially burdened my family, and by extension, Lily's future with their reckless vanity. Legally, Sarah, Harrison Cole told me, tapping his pen against his mahogany desk, you own the estate. They are essentially month-to-month tenants living there on your goodwill. Since they have breached the implicit agreement by failing to pay the property taxes, placing you in legal jeopardy, you have absolute authority to dissolve the trust, liquidate the asset, and evict them. How long does an eviction take? I asked, my voice steady. With the tax delinquency? I can draft a 30-day notice to vacate by the end of the week. If you intend to sell the property to recoup the back taxes and secure the trust's value, we can list it immediately. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone, telling me my daughter was a defect who would ruin her photos. I thought about David telling me to leave Lily with a nanny so I wouldn't ruin the aesthetic. Draft the papers, Harrison, I said, but don't mail them. I'm going to hand-deliver them. The perfect opportunity was already marked on the calendar. Every year, my mother hosted a legendary, fully catered Thanksgiving dinner. It was less about giving thanks and more about securing social leverage. This year was especially critical for her. It was the first holiday following the wedding, and she was hosting Chloe's parents, Jordan and Penelope Sinclair, a couple of intimidating Connecticut old money aristocrats. My mother, obsessed with keeping up the illusion of the perfect, united family in front of the Sinclairs, had sent me a terse, icy email the week prior. Sarah, dinner is at 4:00 p.m. sharp on Thursday. Jordan and Penelope will be there, so please dress elegantly. And for the love of God, leave those hideous headphones off Lily. She honestly believed I would just show up, swallow my pride, and play my role as the disappointing but compliant daughter. She had absolutely no idea the storm that was coming for her. Thanksgiving Day was unseasonably cold. The sky a bruised, heavy gray that threatened snow. Mark drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. In the back seat, Lily was happily playing on her tablet, wearing a beautiful, soft burgundy dress, and securely fitted over her ears were her pink noise-canceling headphones. Tucked inside my designer trench coat was a heavy manila envelope containing the 30-day notice to vacate, the trust dissolution paperwork, and a freshly printed real estate listing agreement. When we pulled up to the Oak Cliff estate, the driveway was lined with luxury vehicles, including the Sinclairs' chauffeured town car. We walked up the manicured brick path, and I didn't even bother knocking. I pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped into the foyer. The house smelled of roasting herbs, expensive perfume, and burning wax. From the formal dining room, I could hear the clinking of crystal goblets and the booming, arrogant laugh of my brother David. Mark grabbed my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. We walked into the dining room. The table was a masterpiece of autumnal excess gold-plated chargers, cascading centerpieces of imported fall foliage, and tall, tame-tapered candles. My parents sat at the heads of the table. David and Chloe sat on one side, beaming. Jordan and Penelope Sinclair sat opposite them, looking appropriately regal. The conversation slammed to a halt the second we entered. My mother's eyes instantly darted to Lily, zeroing in on the pink headphones. Her face went tight, a mask of suppressed fury. "Sarah," she said through gritted teeth, offering a smile so fake it could have been made of plastic. "You're late. And I thought we discussed the dress code." "We had to make a stop, Barbara," I said casually, using her first name. I didn't sit down. Mark stood beside me, his hands resting gently on Lily's shoulders. Jordan Sinclair, a silver-haired man with a stern face, looked at us curiously. This must be the older sister we've heard so little about. And the niece. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Sinclair," I said politely. "I apologize for interrupting your dinner. We actually aren't staying to eat. I just had some urgent family business to attend to with my parents." "Sarah, whatever it is, it can wait," my father interjected, his voice carrying a dangerous low warning. He adjusted his silk tie nervously. "We have guests." "Actually, Richard, it can't," I replied, stepping up to the table, "because it concerns the guests." I pulled the manila envelope from my coat and tossed it onto the center of the table. It landed right next to the gravy boat with a heavy thud. Chloe scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh my God, Sarah, are you seriously doing this right now? Are you still throwing a tantrum because your kid couldn't handle the wedding? Grow up. Watch your tone when you speak about my daughter, Chloe," Mark said. His voice quiet but possessing a steel edge that made David flinch. I looked directly at my mother. "I'm not here about the wedding. I'm here about the house. Or, should I say, my house." Penelope Sinclair lowered her wine glass, her manicured eyebrows raising. "Your house?" "Sarah, shut your mouth right now," my father hissed, half standing out of his chair. The color had completely drained from his face. He knew exactly what was in that envelope. 10 years ago," I said loudly, ensuring my voice carried over his protests, addressing the room but keeping my eyes locked on my parents. My father was nearly disbarred for a malpractice suit. To protect his assets from the massive debt he had accrued, he transferred the deed of this very house into a trust in my name. I am the sole legal owner of this property. David laughed nervously, looking at his new in-laws. "She's delusional. Dad, tell them she's crazy." "He can't," I said, pulling the formal notice to vacate from the envelope and sliding it directly in front of my mother. "Because they also forgot to mention that they are completely broke. They haven't paid the property taxes in 14 months. They took out high-interest loans to pay for your flawless aesthetic wedding, David. And because my name is on the deed, their fake wealth is now damaging my family's financial security." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that happens right before a bomb detonates. I leaned over the table, looking my mother dead in the eyes. The smug, arrogant woman who had banished my daughter for being defective was suddenly trembling. "You have 30 days to vacate my property," I told her, my voice cold and unwavering. "I am dissolving the trust and listing the estate on the market immediately. The proceeds, after I pay off your delinquent taxes, will go into a specialized trust fund for Lily's education and her sensory therapies. You know, the grandchild you hid away." "You can't do this," my mother whispered, tears of utter humiliation springing to her eyes as she realized the Sinclairs were listening to every single word. "We are your parents. You lost the right to call yourselves that when you treated my child like garbage," I replied. Jordan Sinclair slowly stood up. He didn't look at my parents. He looked at David, his expression one of absolute disgust. "Is this true, David? Your family is drowning in debt and squatting in your sister's house?" "Jordan, please, let me explain," my father begged, scrambling out of his chair. "It's just a temporary cash flow issue." "You lied to us," Penelope Sinclair said, her voice shaking with upper-class indignation. You presented yourselves as our equals. You let us pay for half of a wedding while you were defaulting on your taxes. She turned to Chloe. Get your coat, Chloe. We are leaving. I will not sit at a table with frauds. Mom, wait! Chloe shrieked, the reality of her new, impoverished reality crashing down on her. She turned on David, shoving his shoulder. You told me your trust fund was paying for our house deposit. You told me. I didn't know, David yelled, looking panicked. Dad, tell her I didn't know. The dining room erupted into absolute chaos. My father was shouting at Mr. Sinclair, Chloe was screaming at David, and my mother was sitting perfectly still, staring at the eviction notice as if it were a venomous snake. Their perfect aesthetic, their curated image, their entire social standing, it was all burning to the ground in front of their eyes. I didn't stay to watch the ashes fall. I turned around, took Mark's hand, and we walked out of the dining room. As we reached the foyer, Lily looked up at me, pulling one of her pink headphones back. Are we going home now, Mommy? She asked softly. I smiled down at her, the weight of 30 years of family toxicity finally lifting off my shoulders. Yes, sweetie, I said. We're going home. The aftermath of that catastrophic Thanksgiving dinner was not just a fracture, it was an absolute tectonic collapse of my family's fabricated empire. When a facade built on decades of elitist lies, social climbing, and financial smoke and mirrors finally shatters, the resulting explosion leaves absolutely nowhere to hide. My father, Richard, was a man who had never lost a fight in his life, simply because he was usually wealthy enough to bury his opponents in legal fees. He attempted to do the exact same thing to me. He hired a notoriously aggressive defense attorney, threatening to drag me through years of grueling litigation to contest the eviction. He thought I would fold under the pressure, reverting to the compliant, quiet daughter I had always been. But I wasn't fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Lily. When we finally met in civil court, the reality of his situation crashed down on him. My lawyer, Harrison Cole, was an absolute apex predator in the courtroom. He didn't just bring arguments, he brought an impenetrable fortress of documentation. Harrison systematically dismantled my father's blustering threats, presenting the paper trail of 14 months of unpaid property taxes, the suffocating high-interest personal loans taken out to fund David's wedding, and most importantly, the original, ironclad trust documents my father himself had drafted and signed a decade prior. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with a razor-sharp gaze, did not hold back. She didn't just rule in my favor, she humiliated my father on the public record. You used your own daughter as a human shield for your financial gross negligence, Mr. Pendleton, the judge stated, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. You burdened her with your liabilities, squatted in a property she legally owns, and now you expect this court to protect you from the consequences of your own vanity? The motion to block the eviction is denied. You have 30 days remaining to vacate the premises. Watching the Oak Cliff estate get packed up was the final, pathetic scene of their tragic play. Because their credit was utterly destroyed and their bank accounts were drained, they couldn't afford professional movers. On a bitterly cold morning in mid-December, I sat parked in my car down the street, watching my golden boy brother, David, hauling heavy, antique furniture out the front door. He was sweating through his designer cashmere sweater, his face red with exertion and shame, dragging a floral sofa toward a rented, rusted moving truck. The neighbors, the very people my mother had spent her entire adult life trying to impress and dominate, watched the spectacle unfold from their manicured lawns. The neighborhood gossip mill ran at maximum, brutal capacity. Penelope Sinclair had made it her personal mission to ensure every single country club member within a 50-mile radius knew exactly why the wedding of the century had triggered the eviction of the decade. As David struggled with a heavy oak dresser, a black town car drove slowly past the house. The tinted window rolled down just enough to reveal Penelope Sinclair, sipping from a travel mug, watching the ruin of the Pendleton family like it was a matinee performance. The fallout for David was absolute and merciless. Chloe didn't just leave him, she completely erased him from her narrative. Within 48 hours of the Thanksgiving explosion, The Sinclair family lawyers had filed for a rapid annulment based on gross financial misrepresentation and fraud. Chloe claimed, quite accurately, that David had entirely misrepresented his assets and his family's standing to secure her hand in marriage. But the Sinclair family's vengeance didn't stop there. The highly lucrative junior executive position David held was at a boutique private equity firm owned by one of Jordan Sinclair's closest golfing buddies. Jordan made one single phone call from his Connecticut study. When David showed up for work the following Monday, his keycard flashed red at the lobby turnstiles. Security escorted him to the HR department, where he was handed his personal belongings in a cardboard box and a severance agreement. By the first week of December, the Golden Boy was single, publicly humiliated, professionally blacklisted in the Boston financial sector, and entirely broke. With no credit, no savings, and the Oak Cliff house legally seized, my parents and David had nowhere left to go. They were forced to rent a cramped, poorly insulated, two-bedroom apartment in a deteriorating complex on the far outskirts of the city. It was the exact type of neighborhood my mother used to intentionally lock her car doors when driving through. My father's reputation in the legal community was decimated by the public Sinclair scandal, forcing him into a disgraced, uncompensated early retirement. He now spends his days sitting on a cheap patio chair on a tiny concrete balcony, drinking cheap gin and staring at a parking lot. But the most profound, poetic justice of all fell upon Barbara. To make rent and pay off the aggressive debt collectors hounding them for the wedding loans, my mother, the woman who openly mocked my degree and treated service workers like an inferior species, had to get a minimum wage job. Today, if you visit the high-end luxury department store in downtown Boston, you will see Barbara standing behind the fragrance counter. She wears a stiff polyester uniform, spending 8 hours a day standing on her feet, spritzing expensive perfume samples for the very women she used to host at her elite, catered dinner parties. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that just last month, one of her former tennis partners walked up to her counter, pretended not to recognize her at first, and then loudly demanded Barbara fetch her a fresh tester bottle from the stockroom. Barbara had to smile, say, "Right away, ma'am," and fetch it. As for the Oak Cliff estate, I let Harrison Cole handle the entire sale. Because the property had been so meticulously maintained to keep up my parents' ridiculous appearances, it ignited a massive, aggressive bidding war the moment it hit the market in early January. It sold in less than 14 days for $3.2 million in pure, unencumbered cash to a tech executive from California. After Harrison paid off the 14 months of delinquent property taxes, the broker fees, the legal costs, and the remaining minor debts attached to the estate, the profit was substantial. The remaining $2.8 million was transferred directly out of the real estate trust and deposited into a newly established, bulletproof, irrevocable trust fund. The sole beneficiary of that multi-million-dollar trust? My beautiful daughter, Lily. My parents had sacrificed everything, destroyed their family, and shattered a little girl's heart just to preserve a hollow aesthetic for professional wedding photos. And in the end, the very child they deemed too defective to walk down their pristine aisle became the sole legal inheritor of their entire fabricated empire. We never spoke to them again. I changed my number, Mark upgraded our home security system, and we blocked David on every conceivable digital platform. They are ghosts to us now, trapped in a hell of their own making. Last week, Mark and I sat in the bleachers of Lily's elementary school auditorium. It was the annual spring pageant. Lily walked out onto the stage, wearing a bright, cheerful yellow dress she had picked out herself. The auditorium was loud, packed with cheering parents and flashing cameras, but Lily was perfectly calm. She had her soft pink noise-canceling headphones securely fitted over her ears, blocking out the overwhelming chaos while still letting her experience the pure joy of the moment. When it was her turn, she stepped up to the center microphone, pushed her left headphone back just a fraction of an inch, and sang her line perfectly. The crowd erupted into genuine, warm applause. Mark reached over and squeezed my hand, tears shining brightly in his eyes. I looked up at my daughter, radiant and unequivocally happy, completely unaware that she was a multi-millionaire who had brought down a dynasty of narcissists simply by existing and being exactly who she is. I smiled, letting the applause wash over us. The aesthetic of my life might not be champagne and oyster, but it is authentic. It is filled with unconditional love, and to me, it is absolutely perfect. Family isn't about sharing DNA, it's about sharing respect. When my parents discarded my daughter for a picture-perfect aesthetic, they thought I'd stay silent. Instead, I let their own financial lies burn their fake empire to the ground. If you loved this story of hard karma, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Let me know in the comments, what would you have done?